Hello, I'm James Mayer, and this afternoon I'm with Cristiano van Zeller for a new I Love Douro interview in partnership with Grape Discoveries. Cristiano van Zeller, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, James.
Thank you very much for welcoming us to your garden in Foz do Douro. You run a very fine wine estate in the Rio Torta Valley in the Douro, Quinta Vale Dona Maria. And I should, as I just said, this interview is taking place in Foz, near Porto, and it's a staggering 38 degrees this afternoon.
Yes.
It's absolutely sizzling hot. How hot do you think it's going to be in the Douro?
Well, when I left yesterday, it was 41 at 7 o'clock at night.
Right.
So
7 o'clock at night.
7 o'clock,
yes.
Yeah. When I came down. So today must be really hot, to say the least.
Yes, yes. Is that good for the grapes? That extent of heat?
At the moment, with the stage of development that the grapes are in maturity, that's not very important. I mean, when we had a couple of heat waves or 2 days of very high temperatures, when the grapes were just transforming from the bago de ervilha, the very pea, like a chickpea, the small berry, into something. They cooked, so we called a queima or escaldão, and so we lose production. So that's not very good time for the heat to come. But at this moment, it just helps out the maturity. Hopefully, it won't fasten it too much. But it's for the moment it's okay. We're used for the heat.
We're the 17th of July today.
Yeah, it's okay.
The final stretch.
We already have in most places what we call the pintor. The grapes are being painted, gaining color.
Yes.
And so they're very balanced. I was on the phone with one of our viticulturists just before you came. And he said everything seems to be fine, there's no problem, they're developing well.
Wonderful. How exciting, yes.
It's exciting to see. We had a difficult year. There was a lot of rain through spring, which is good but bad because we need to treat.
Sure.
To avoid oidium, mildium and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But apart from that, we had a pretty balanced.
Can you already anticipate a date for the vintage?
Not yet, no. It might be a little earlier than last year, but I have seen mixed signs of dates for the harvest. So some are delayed. Some depends on when you prune. When you do the pruning. In either in December, January, or February. If you do a late pruning and you're in heights, you tend to delay a little bit the harvest a little bit more.
Yes.
So we try to control that and getting the harvest a little bit further.
Right.
Further
and
away.
How about getting your pickers this year?
Good question. We have contracts with groups of people from year to year, and we do those contracts right at the beginning of leather, and we have also our own internal groups, people who work for us throughout the year. So we are fine as companies, as Van Zellers companies, because of leather, Quinta Vale D, we are okay.
Good.
What's going to happen in general, we're not sure, but I think that year after year we see this problem. We're not going to get enough people, but then in the end we have enough people to do the harvest.
Yes, the Douro seems to get through by some kind of miracle every year.
Did you remember that there was a film with Gwyneth Paltrow and called Shakespeare in Love or something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
And there was one of the characters that said, it's all going to be well. All is going to come out well. And why is that? I don't know. It's a miracle. I think the Douro goes through that very much indeed.
Yes.
And every year after year.
And of course, the terraces aren't really suited to mechanized picking, are they? I mean,
very impossible to pick. You have to mechanize. So everything is hand done.
Yeah. Your family, the Van Zellers, have had, of course, a very, very long association with winemaking in Portugal, particularly port winemaking. Would you like to say a word about this family story?
All the Van Zellers that exist in Portugal and in many countries around the world, with the exception of France, descend from one gentleman, who is my seventh grandfather.
Oh yes.
Who was born in Rotterdam. The Van Zellers with the last name Van Zeller, because there's many descendants from other Van Zellers, but not through the male lines any longer. But my seventh grandfather, Arnold, was born in Rotterdam in 1703 and arrived in Portugal in 1726, 1728. Around that, and he married a lady called Anna Francisca Henkel. She was the daughter of a German, Peter Henkel, and of an English lady, Anna Maria Palmer.
Right.
And through both, they were already in the wine business, both the Palmers and the Henkels.
They were shippers, or they were?
They were shippers.
Yeah.
Because growers, the port shippers became growers much later, by buying properties mainly in the 19th century. Only the only port shipper that started as a grower was Ferreira in the 19th century.
Oh, really?
They started as a grower, and then they they created a port company, a shipping company. Most of the other traders or the other known names for the port business were first merchants and then became, they bought some properties, but that was normally middle of the 19th century.
Yes. And so the family shipped.
The family was already
world,
shipping.
I believe.
The family was already shipping, and through the Palmers, we go to the first English wine merchant in Portugal, Walter Maynard, who was established here in 1652. Even before port was called port. Port was called port only in 1675.
Yes.
And Mr. Maynard married a Portuguese lady who was the daughter of another Portuguese wine merchant from 1620. And he was already in business through his wife and then his father-in-law and then back to the end of the 16th century. So we say family was established as a family line non-stop since 1620 at least. We can trace that back to 1620, but we can actually go a little bit further back to a Portuguese wine merchant in Porto at the end of the 16th century. But we say 400 years is good enough.
All right, yes. let's go with
us,
that.
Of the Van Zellers on a straight line, there's us and a couple of cousins of mine, of Fernando and Alvaro, who also have a port company.
May I ask you whether you feel Dutch or Portuguese?
Portuguese, completely Portuguese.
Yes.
I think the family stopped speaking Dutch in the right middle to the end of the 18th century. And funnily enough, some of the diaries at the end of the 18th century, family diaries, were also written in German and English.
Are they? Yes.
And so is a mixture.
Yes. And it would be very difficult for the Portuguese influence not to rub
completely
off.
Portuguese. Although my third grandfather, great-grandfather, to find a Portuguese ancestor, it was only one of his eight great-grandparents was Portuguese. All the others were English, Dutch, French, and German.
Yes.
So
I believe one of your clients, one of the family's clients in the 18th century was Tsarina Catherine the Great.
Yes,
who was a lady who enjoyed the pleasures of life.
Of life, port.
Port was one of them.
My sixth grandfather, Peter, was consul of Russia, and we still have that document from signed by Catherine the Great, nominating him consul.
He was consul in Lisbon in Porto. I see. Yes.
And Peter, because he at that time was when after Peter the Great, Catherine came after that. Russia opened up to Europe and the rest of the world, and we were some of the first to have a relationship with Russia for trading wine.
Very exciting, yes.
That's very exciting. Yeah. That's a really...
Your career as a wine producer, winemaker, has spanned what we might call the maturation of Douro DOC, which of course is the fine, non-fortified, dry wine that's grown up in the Douro in parallel with port. Would you like to expand on that?
Well, yes. Douro wine, going back a little bit, James, if you don't mind, port at the beginning was a dry wine. It only became sweet in the 19th century. There was a transformation of port as we know it into port as we know it now at the beginning of the 19th century.
And how did that come about?
It was what I read and I was told by people who knew much more than I still do about the history of port, that there are 3 harvests in the 19th century, 2 of which were 1820 and 1832, and 1811 if I'm not mistaken, where there was so much sugar and so much concentration that not all the sugar was transformed into alcohol, even after some small fortification, because the fortification was not done as we do it now. It was only added after the wine was fermented, fully fermented, to preserve the wine in travel and space, so in time and space, so in travel and in aging.
Sure.
But those years, the wine was, after the fortification, was still sweet. So there was some natural sugar left over, and the success on the markets, mainly in the English market, was so great that very, very soon everybody tried to emulate the natural process.
Yes.
And soon discovered by adding the branding during the fermentation, the natural sweetness, natural sugar some sugar from the grapes will be kept and the wine will be sweet. And so port as we know it was born at the beginning of the 19th century. There was a big discussion in the trade. It lasted for tens of years, I think about 50 years, where there were people like Baron Forrester who said that stopping the fermentation and adding the brandy the way we are doing now was a fraud. And that was a destruction of the quality and the style and the greatness of port. And there were those that said that was a mistake. And I think he conceded defeat in a letter somewhere around a couple of years before he died. He died in 63, so I think he drowned in 63, if I'm not mistaken, if I got my dates right. But so he conceded defeat in that discussion in 63. By then, port, as we know, it was by far well established, and there was no reason to go back.
And the Douro DOC revolution?
Well, the Douro DOC, having said that, there was always dry wine produced in the Douro, and of all the grapes of the Douro, only part of them are transformed into port, are made into port wine, so are fortified.
Well, traditionally the best grapes, of course.
Traditionally the best grapes. Now, at this moment, it's in the last 40, 50 years, it's been somewhere between 40 and 60% of the production of the Douro being transformed into port. So there was always leftovers, which were badly done, too late, no fruit, were just for distillation, local consumption, with exceptions. I mean, there were the great exceptions who were the pioneers and the example for what we did. Barcavelha, Quinta do Coto, Royal Oporto still always did a little bit of dry wines and so on. So there was a few, those to mention the most important ones perhaps. And the most important one, Barcavelha. So in the early 1990s, well, in the 1980s when I got to Naval, when I started working in the business in 1981, I never understood why things were not properly done. And I could understand that it was a headache for port producers to think about something else other than just making port, which was our core business. But I started making experiments with dry wines in 1985 at Naval, and I did it through until we sold in 1993.
Did you? So they were really very early on.
Very early on, yes. And I knew that other people were doing. David Baverstock with the Symingtons were doing that. Dirk Nieport started experimenting. João-Nicolau Almeida was already doing, and other people I'm sure were doing. So those are the ones with whom I had any discussions and talks. And And I remember I made in 1987, I bottled it. It was the first one I bottled at Naval, just for us, just to see how it went and how it developed. And James Suckling from Wine Spectator was with us in 1989 when I bottled wine. And he took it to a dinner he was going to have somewhere. I think it was a Bonfim or something like that. And he took a bottle not saying what it was. And later,
what did they say, Bonfim?
Well, the comments were, this was Australian, this is powerful, this is immense. It was full of defects, full of problems, because I knew it, I did it on purpose. But this is immense, this is this is that, this is that. And then just James said, well, this is made by Cristiano at Naval. And he said, he doesn't know how to make wine. This is impossible, this is... And I thought that wine was totally undrinkable. Dirk Niepot saved a couple of bottles, and about 5 or 6 years ago, in a dinner that we have sometimes at the end of the harvest with our teams, he opened one bottle blind and had no clue what I was tasting. And nobody had any clue apart from him. He does that very often. I'm sure he did that with you too.
Yes, he certainly did.
Guess what? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Yes. And everybody was saying Italian or Spanish, or I couldn't get. And he said, but it was pretty good. And that was nearly 30 years after the harvest. Marvelous, and he said, you did this stuff in 1987. I said, no kidding, you kept a bottle. And it was pretty good. I thought it would be impossible to drink.
Great.
But that showed us that there was a possibility to develop the Douro wines. And it always confused me what a waste of good grapes that we had in the region. And we just had to switch. We changed the thinking, and it was very easy. If we just changed it, we could do both great wines. To make Douro wine, to make port, you need a little bit over matured grapes, and so you need to wait a little bit. You have time. I'm simplifying the whole thing, but let's put it this way. But to make wine, dry wines, you need them to be picked at the right moment of freshness, balance of acidity, because you're not adding any brandy, you're not blending, you're not aging it for a tawny port or doing anything. So in order to do that, you need to pick at the right time. So if we start with a port and we pick a little bit late and a little bit slight when they're getting over matured, when we pick for the dry wines after that, we're going to get no freshness, over matured grapes, with no interest, no fruit, nothing. What if we just start with the Douro wines instead of starting with the port? We can do both. This little stupid change makes the whole difference, and made the whole difference. And
was there a certain amount of skepticism in the valley?
No, I don't think there was. I think the
moment was right.
Was an inertia, and the moment was right by coincidence. Some people had sold their port businesses, were thinking differently. My generation was coming into the business. 35 years ago, we were a little bit younger than we are now, so we felt, and I'm talking about Dirk, I'm talking about João Nicolau Almeida, and José António Rojas, who was the old generation. He was a great visionary at Ramos Pinto. He was a great visionary of that, and so João.
Sure.
And we had an obligation, a need, and a challenge. Let's go through the need. Any independent property in the short, medium, and long term, just selling grapes would not survive. And that was already true in the 1980s, but still, depending on the size, moving and being reasonably balanced. But depending completely on the development of port and port sales and the very few actors in the port business. In 1981, when I started, there was 21 groups of companies port companies, and those traditional port companies were dramatically reduced by the end of the 1980s and 1990s.
Indeed,
the number being bought by groups and different companies. So properties ranging from 5-6 hectares to 40 hectares, just by selling grapes medium to long term, they would not survive economically or sustain the development. And so there was a need to do something and move on. there was a challenge, an obligation, because we were the most prepared at the time, most prepared generation. We had the knowledge, the tradition, the contacts, commercial contacts, the viticulture, enology knowledge. We knew how to make wine. They were the beginning of this generation of people coming out of the university in Villarreal and in the south.
Yes.
UTAD, but also in the south.
A generation of more
professionally trained. And people with vision. So we had, and we were families that have been living in the Douro for generations and living out of the region, and we love the region, so it was our obligation to do something.
Yes.
And a challenge. Can
we
do it? Are we able to reach, to do something? And can we match the image, the quality? Can we position ourselves in the world with a different wine?
With a group of colleagues of your generation, you created the Douro Boys.
Later on, we created the Douro Boys.
Now, of course, all very adult.
Very old, very adult.
didn't want to say that, but
we, as we say in Portuguese, we became from boys, we became boys.
Yes, and the Douro Boys have been instrumental. One of the instrumental factors in putting the Douro on the world map.
Yes, it was also a coincidence, because Krasto was the leading of the group that was the first to establish itself. Dirk started making wines in 1990 but not commercializing them, so it was later on. Krasto was the first independent property moving from just selling grapes to do something. Then Valado, then Val Dona Maria, and then Valmião, and we decided to do it all together, because we were already, I was involved at the beginning of Krasto and beginning of Valado with the families, starting up their projects and doing Val Dona Maria at the same time. So there was an embryo of the Douro Boys somewhere there, because we were already working together.
Are you still working together?
Yes, we still are. It's very much active
that's
as a group.
Yes.
And we thought that at the time, just being on your own, like Krasto was for a while, or with a couple of others, not many more, we were not getting anywhere. We needed some critical mass, not in terms of bottles, how many bottles we produce and sell, but in how many good quality producers we can present ourselves on the market with.
Yes, absolutely.
And for a region to have some critical mass, you need a number of people, of ambassadors.
Sure.
And you get some critical mass so that you're visible.
Yeah. And looking back, where were your first successes?
My first
successes in
terms
of recognition for.
They were very quick with Krasto, because when I started with Krasto, when we started out in 1994, actually I went to Krasto the day I decided to leave Naval in October 1993. And I wanted to cry on someone's shoulder, and Georges Rouquet said, "Come on over and let's have a chat." And I said, "Do you want to do something together?" And yes, I already had some ideas. And we sat for dinner just before I came to Porto, and I stayed there overnight. And we immediately said, let's start something, let's develop these ideas. And in the beginning of January 1994, Krasto started, but there were no wines. The first harvest was September 1994. The first wines presented was in May 1995.
Yes.
So,
and that was David Baverstock,
David was immediately came on board right at the same time. I loved working with David. David is a very old friend, and we had ideas, and we worked together very well. And so David came on board, and with George, and then later with Miguel, who had trained with me, did his stage with me at Naval and Van Zeller Company in the early 90s. And Miguel was finishing his master degrees in the US and then came back. And so the team was formed, but right at the beginning, David was thinking of how to do things, and I was selling an idea around the world. Until I only showed the first wines in May 1995, I already had 10 clients around the world set up for the moment I showed the wine, and if it filled expectations, the thing would go. And the expectations were so overfilled from those partners in business, people like Oddbins, Adnams in the UK, Wine Society, wine cellars that later became Inotre Wine Cellars.
Yes.
With David Gleave.
Sure.
And so the success was immediate. We oversold by 5 the volume we had produced in an hour sitting down at London Wine Trade Fair in May 1995.
Ooh.
And by 50% more expensive.
Paid for the air ticket, yeah.
Yeah, 50% more expensive than the average price that George had given me as a base.
Yes.
I said, no, we need to go a bit higher.
Yeah.
So it was quite a great success.
Yes.
So Britain was the first great success of Crashto.
Yes.
And the Douro started internationally. I think Crashto has a crucial role in there. And then we already had people waiting in Holland, in Denmark, in other countries.
Yeah.
And so it was suddenly spreading less wine than we had the demand for, and creating a demand for wines.
Yes.
So it was easier somehow building up with other brands like Valado later and Quinta Vale D later, and doing that in parallel with Dirk, bringing people in to show what we were doing.
Yes.
I remember a lovely trip that we did in 1996 in the Douro with a few guests, showing something that we had but we didn't have, because it was more ideas than palpable, touching, acting things. So that there were other producers working there. La Rosa did, of course. Ramos Pinto was there, and Ferreira was always there, and Quinta do Couto had a crucial role in that whole thing. Not international, but in terms of the Douro as a whole.
Yes.
So it was a real adventure to do, and other producers came along, and we tried. Dirk was fantastic on that. Dirk Nieport was fantastic on that, bringing in people and helping and teaching and so for a long time we were saying, "Look, come in, let's do some tastings, let's see what everybody's doing, let's progress in this." And then in the end, when Miao came in with the first vintage in 1999 in 2001, we got together and said, why don't we do this in an organized way? We're all friends and family and all that. And so the Douro Boys were created in 2001.
Yes.
It's been an adventure.
I'm sure,
Fun.
Good. Back to port, just a moment, if we might. Would you say that today port is very much a specialist's wine, or do you think it has a future as a more kind of general public?
It's interesting. Port was very much Port always had these two sides of specialist and general public. Standard Ruby, Tawny and White still accounts for 75-80% of port sales. So there you're talking about general public. When you move a little bit for the reserves and 10-year LBVs, 10-year-old Tawnies and all that, you get a mixture of specialists and general public. When you move up to vintage port and old colheitas, even for the price that these wines reach and cost, you reach more a more specialist public.
Yes.
I see port as at the moment still very much in balance with these two segments, but I see that the development of the specialist area, so we're talking about the special categories, the old Tawnies, LBV, vintage, and the growth in those higher quality ports, as being more general public in some areas, but still being a specialist wine. We hope that we open up the opportunity for these wines.
Quite a lot of people find the whole port thing a little bit complex, don't they? And I believe you've recently come up with an idea which seems to be very good, which is you brand on the label rather than saying, this is a Collietta or an LBV or something, and people going, what the hell's that? Crafted by nature, or
crafted by hand and by time.
Yes.
I've when we were rebranding Van Zellers and Company, the ports of Van Zellers and Company and the whole thing, how can we explain port in a very simple way and try to portray it as in styles that people will be able to understand better, and then try to develop that. Instead of just being Ruby Tawny, 10-year-olds and all that, it was crafted by hand, crafted by time, and crafted by nature. And so in these three categories, in crafted by nature, we put the wines of a single year that go into the bottle at a very early stage and age in bottle, late bottle vintage and vintage port. And those are unfined and unfiltered, so we produce the wine, we put it in cask. I still do roll the casks, mix them very well with everything in it, no filterage, nothing, straight into the bottle as raw as possible, to age in bottle with all its potential. So it's nature, brutal nature, what it comes out of the grapes, put into bottle. So that we say crafted by nature. And then crafted by hand are all those ports that we blend. Different vintages, we blend different locations, different grape varieties, like all port are from very different grape varieties, and those are crafted by hand because it's the human hand every single year that does the different percentages of different vintages to create a 10-year-old tawny, a 20-year-old tawny, a reserve ruby, a reserve tawny, a reserve white, and all those blended wines. And then crafted by time are the colheita single harvest wines that age in cask all their lives. Only time creates them. So we only bottle by demand, on demand, so that's time that creates them.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
At least we try to give easier division,
a different handle,
of the thing. And we put on all our bottle whether it's a crafted by time, by nature, or by hand.
A few years ago, I did some work with Parfum Guerlain in Paris, and it's always seemed to me that you can make quite an interesting comparison between the nose, the guy the nez, who selects the various components for the perfumes, and the master blender in, for instance, port wine. Does that sound?
That's a great comparison, because the most important man in a port company is the master blender. I'm going to say something terrible. Port is pretty easy to make in terms of grapes. Now you need to get great grapes. You have a tremendous work in viticulture. That's 90% of all wine is viticulture anyway. And then you crush the grapes, and at some moment you add the brandy, you stop the fermentation, you mix everything, put into a cask, and wait.
Yes.
So theoretically, it's pretty simple to make.
Your colleague David Guimarães at Fonseca Taylor, he says that the most important ingredient are the grapes, that you have to have very good quality.
Those
grapes.
are the most important ingredients. So viticulture is 90% of all wine, be it port or be it wine. It's all the work in viticulture, and that is where we put 90% of our efforts. Then in port, just making the wine and knowing how to age it, you don't need a lot of science. Port has tremendously improved with the knowledge and development of science. I'm just being simplistic. But in reality, in the end, when it turns out to the control of a stock, the aging of the stock, the blending and everything, it's the master blender who does it all. After that, you don't need an enologist as such. You need people with a great memory. And the most important thing that port companies have to transmit through generations is that memory of the master blenders. And those that cannot do it will fail. Sooner or later. In time, they will fail.
But sometimes they're even dynasties, aren't they?
They are dynasties, like at Newport. There's the dynasty of the Newports,
for instance,
and the dynasties of the master blenders that have been from grandfather to grandson. There's 4 generations.
Really,
5 generations of Newports and 4 generations of the master blenders. And that's very important. And there's always in the families that are still attached to the business, that importance of transmitting that idea.
I
started tasting port with my great-grandfather. He died when I was 9, Luís Vasconcelos Porto, who was one of the great blenders and one of great characters of the port business.
So how old were you when you were tasting?
I remember starting smelling only with him, and with the aromatics. I was 5 or 6.
Yes.
Just smell this, and I wanted to put my finger. No finger. Just smell. Just see what it smells, and the perfume.
We can always edit that bit out.
No. But I didn't. The only time I did try, there was a little vat, a little cask at Naval, which had the 2 tops were glass, and it was normally put some tawny port to serve with a little tap to the customers and to the clients and to the visitors, and it was very nice. Opened the tap and the glass underneath and so on, and they used to keep that in the cellar at Naval end of the house. And I remember one day going down there and putting my mouth under the tap and opening the tap. I was caught on time. My bottom felt. I think it still aches.
You can still.
I can still feel it from that day. But that was the only time I did anything inappropriate when tasting wine. But normally my great uncles, and my great grandfather allowed me to smell, and that was an enormous experience. Because smell is a memory that you keep all your life, and you go back to your smells of your childhood, and something triggers when you smell something that you remember.
Proust's Madeleine, it's that sort of thing, isn't it? Yep.
So the master blender, like in the perfumes, they don't taste the perfume, they just smell.
Yep.
And even when I do most of my blending, it's 90% is smell, is not tasting. In port and the old tawnies and everything, it's all about smell. And it's about memory. So there's a great similarity between the two. That's a great example. And the most important figure in a port company for me.
Right. You were talking about viticulture just now. Of course, another component in the bottle is the terroir. And at Quinta Vale Donna Maria, you've got a very gifted winemaker, Joanna was. We had 2 We now have 3, but we have. I'm very fortunate.
The first winemaker that we had there, and she was with us from 1999 to 2015, was Sandra Tavares da Silva.
Oh yes,
from Wine and Soul.
Wine and Soul, yes.
Sandra started her working life at Quinta Vale Donna Maria in 1999 as a stagiaire, and immediately I understood that she was. You're not going to edit this, but I think she's. For me, Sandra is the most perfect and knowledgeable person in terms of wine that I know of everybody, in terms of the feeling, the touch. Sandra does 2 things. She has the scientific knowledge, and she has a special gift for wine and for blending, and for which overcomes that scientific knowledge, and that's very rare in a lot of people. A lot of people are very technical, and Sandra overcomes. I have to ask
you, how do you get to that point? Why?
I think you have a mixture of things. You have a mixture of passion and inherent gift.
Yes.
It's like a great musician or a great player.
Right.
You have to train.
Yes.
But if you have the ability, the natural ability to do that, and being a woman, I think also helps. I for all the women, I've worked mostly with women in the Douro after the new projects. Sandra, Joanna, my daughter, and others.
Yes.
And all of them have a better ability. They are more natural towards what they do and how they appreciate it, and more direct.
Well, let's hope there are more and more women in the business. Yes,
and so Sandra was crucial in the development of Vale Donna Maria. Joanna came in 2007 as a trainee.
Okay.
And then Joanna took over after in 2015. She took over basically the daily thing later on, 2008, 9, 10, and so on. And Joanna also has an enormous ability. I mean, she learned with the best. I'm not talking about me, but no, I'm not. Really, I'm not.
Right.
I'm just very good at telling stories and convincing others that I'm very good. That's what I'm good at. Whether I'm good at making wine, I'm not so sure.
It's always half the battle.
But Joanna is also has that talent. She has that ability, and she has proven it. throughout her life. And now that Joanna left Val Dona Maria in 2017, because she married, she was a mother, and she moved to the Minho, near Monção.
Yes, yes.
And so she was far away from Val Dona Maria. It became impossible for her to commute and do that. So now we have a team at Vleda, at Val Dona Maria, who are also talented men this time. The first time in many years of Val Dona Maria there's only men who do the work, and they really, and Manuel Soares is the head of enology at Vleda, and of course my cousin Antonio Guedes, who's one of the best scientists in the great sense of science of viticulture and enology that Portugal has for wine. And so everybody together, Pedro Barbosa at Viticulture, so all the group is doing a great job. So it's a great continuation of great winemakers.
Yes, yes. I'd just like to get back to this.
Joanna is working with me at Van Zellers and Company also. So
oh, good. Yeah,
in a part-time basis.
Yes.
So Joanna is still very much in part of the project, or part of the projects is still. Yeah.
So, besides these talented women and now men, the terroir. What is so special about the terroir that you have at Quinta Vale Dona Maria, which influences the
whole thing?
The whole thing.
I think the Val Dona Maria is situated in the Rio Torto Valley, and somehow.
Which is on the south bank.
On the south bank of the Douro,
yes,
and it's a subsidiary river of the Douro, near Pinhão, just west of Pinhão. The Rio Torto Valley is unique in terms of climate, in terms of soil, sun exposures, and diversity, and somehow it has a natural ability to have vineyards.
Yes.
There's a lot of grape varieties that you find more in Rio Torto, like Touriga Franca, Rufete, a lot of Tinta Amarela, and the Tinta Barroca has a special character in there. Our Quinta Vale Dona Maria Vinho do Rio is so much 40% Barroca.
Right.
And I never liked Barroca very much in wine, in Douro, or Douro DOC in dry wines, until I discovered that 40% of Vinha do Rio, Val Dona Maria Vinha do Rio, is Tinta Barroca. And I phoned David Guimarães, who said, Barroca, you're wrong, Barroca is one of the best grapes, and so on. I said, I love it for port, but for wine, no, you're wrong. And I phoned him, I said, you're right. I was wrong and you're right. But given the right place, I don't know whether it's how the wind, the freshness, the heat. I got 51 degrees Celsius in Val Dona Maria in 2003, when that very hot year.
Yes.
So it's really hot in summer. But somehow these old vineyards and these little parcels, which are so different one from the other. That's how I find the Douro, like a little, like a Burgundian terroir, in the sense that every little parcel is very different from the other.
Is individual.
And you can create that. That's what we do at Quinta Vale Dona Maria with so many single vineyard wines.
And what about field blends, which I think are very important in your
For me,
portfolio?
the field blends are...
Could you perhaps just explain what a field blend is? Because there may be some people listening.
A field blend is a parcel of vineyards where we plant, traditionally randomly, many different grape varieties. So you can have in a row of 30 vines, you can have 30 different grape varieties.
Yes.
I've counted, in fact, I counted in a row at Val Dona Maria that we have about, I think it was about 42 vines. I counted more than 20 different varieties in one single row. So the traditional,
in the old days, people didn't know exactly where.
They knew they had it, and more or less where. Through time and through the replanting of the missing vines and the one that died, the mixture became even more complex. I love that mixture. There's one. I think that mixture is crucial for the production of wine, of our Douro wines. I know that a lot of people think that they're much more controlled and controlled much more, and that's a fact. If they have different grape varieties planted by grape variety, and then they produce and ferment by grape variety, and then they do the blending in the end.
Yes.
But we know that blending in the fermenting vat, be it a lagar or be it a stainless steel vat or a concrete vat, we make a better wine than making by separate grape variety and then blending later. And that's true for port. It's always been.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
David
yes.
Guimarães explained, I'm sure, how they're redoing their vineyards, and they're doing by block with a mixture of grape varieties.
Yes.
1 row of
Indeed.
this and 2 rows
Yep,
of that
yep.
and 3 rows of that, and they're doing a whole block, and then they pick the whole block and they ferment the whole block together. We know that produces the best wine. It's better than fermenting by grape variety and blending later. But in port, that's easier, because in port you can actually wait and have the proper over maturity of everything, or maturity, so you can balance it out. In wine, for the freshness and the right maturity moment to pick the grapes, they mature at different times. So you can actually, if you have different grape varieties planted by block, you cannot mix them in the same lagar. It will be a coincidence if some mature at the same time.
Yes, yes.
But if you have them planted in a field, an homogeneous field, randomly or mixed, the tendency of those grape varieties is to mature at a much more similar moment.
Yeah.
So instead of having so many different, some of them can mature at 10 days difference or something like that in the same valley. But if you have them together, they may mature with a 2-3 days difference. So you can actually, to blend different grape varieties in a fermenting vat for wine, for dry wine, the best thing to do is mix them in the vineyard. If you mix them in the vineyard, you have a similar maturity, then you can put everything together in the same vat. And that's why
It sounds like an enormous challenge.
it is an enormous challenge, but
Very empirical.
yeah, but very empirical. But the challenge, the explanation for why they mature more closely together was given to me. It's a complex explanation. I'm not going to go through it because I may get it not very right, by some biology professor, French viticulture and Portuguese biology.
Oh, yes, yes.
And they explained the tendency that different plants have.
But the French don't do that, do they?
No, but a lot of the old vineyards in France and in Italy and in Spain, talk about the 18th, 19th century, were mixed vineyards. The movement with exception Burgundy and a few other places, but the tendency to have by grape variety is much more modern, let's say 200 years or something like that. But Portugal was safe, or so isolated that tendency was kept, and the mixture of in the same field happened because most farmers wanted to have some kind of certainty through the different years that they would have an average crop. Because some grape varieties produce better in some years than others. Not all the grape varieties are attacked by the same disease at the same time. So it was a kind of a safe thing to do and experiment mixing things. Some grape varieties give color, other quantity, other structure, others some fruit, different fruits, and people started experimenting. Yes. And and port always kept that character. And when we experimented that in wine, we found out that the more complex wines, the ones with great complexity, the wines that gave us more surprises, were those coming from the old vines, which were the ones that had the mixed. This is not a general rule, but as a rule, you can say that it helps.
I see.
And at the same time, it becomes a surprise. I personally like to be surprised every year. I don't like that square, knowing exactly what's going to happen. Very scientific, very that's boring.
Yes,
wine is about being excited, surprised, challenged every year.
Yes.
And so I like that uncertainty, extra uncertainty.
My eye keeps on going down to these wines we've got in our glasses.
I've got just
here.
two. I mean, we have all those other bottles over there.
Right. What have we got?
We've got.
Would you like to?
Yes, this is one of our first whites that we did. The CV curriculum vitae that I did with a CV is a blend of many different grape varieties. 1 hectare of 60, 70, 80-year-old vineyard in a higher altitude, not at Val d'Anna Maria. We don't have white grapes at Val d'Anna Maria. And CV is a brand that started as a red in 2003, and we did our first white in 2013, fermented and aged in oak. The crushing is done very very softly, and in reality for this wine, since we pick and we put into the bottle, we lose, so to speak, 72% of the initial volume. So we only take 28%. First of all, because the press that we use, we only use the running juice, the free running juice, and the best juice at the right moment. And then during the fermentation, there's a lot of loss, and when it goes into bottle, only 28% of the initial.
Right.
We don't.
Of course, that's on top of the low yields you get in the Douro.
Of the Douro. We do about 1,500 to 2,000 bottles, if lucky. We're lucky of this a year. This I didn't see which year it is.
One this afternoon.
In fact, 16. Good. I didn't look. But I could see it without my glasses. That's great. I have a friend a few friends snore a lot, and sometimes we play rugby and they share rooms, and we also shoot partridges.
Right.
And we share rooms when we go and so on. And one of them, 2 years ago, one of them snores like there is no tomorrow. And they were two of them, they're cousins, so they were sleeping together. And the one that doesn't snore took a pill and put ear plugs. And the next morning I said, "Did you sleep? How can you sleep with this guy? And did you sleep?" "I slept like a baby." And the other said, I'm cured," because the other had taken a pill and earplug. So this is a bit the same, but
yes. It's marvelously grapey.
It's very grapey. Should be a little more fresh, but it's so hot outside. It was fresh before, but it's very complex for a white wine, and the Douro can produce extraordinary white wines. The volumes are not very big because we're talking about altitude. This is a vineyard at 450, 500 meters altitude, and so this is a wine for aging in bottle. So it's beginning to get this maturity in bottle age, and it's a wine for food. It's not an aperitif.
When do you think the ideal drinking time would be?
I normally I would be drinking now. If we don't have a lot of stock of that because we sell on Primeur all these, but I'd be drinking the first wines 13, 14 now. So 5, 6 years, 7 years. But they're already giving enormous pleasure. We had a beautiful meal organized in Macau, in one of the top restaurants in Macau, by a sommelier, a Portuguese master sommelier, João Pires. And he said, "Give me the wines and I will do the meal and I will do the pairing, but I won't tell you what it is." I said, "You're my friend. I know you do well. I don't interfere." And he served this with a queijo da serra, the mountain cheese, the very soft Portuguese mountain cheese, creamy one. And this was just out of this world. In fact, he served the first one, 13, because this was 3 years ago. And so this is great wine for that kind of cheese. I haven't tasted this 16. And the port is a 10-year-old tawny.
That's a 10-year-old tawny. Okay.
Well, we have Vinha do Rio over there, and Val d'Anna Maria, Vinha da Francisca, and CV White, and CV Red, and others, and vintage ports. But I thought that just having two wines here would be enough to. This is a 10-year-old tawny. This is, I would say, the beginning of the tawnies, where you have. 10-year-old is a blend of different years.
Sure.
The youngest wine here is about 6 years old. You will really get that tawny color, that extra orangey color, the oxidation color, when the wine is 6-7 years. That's when you start getting it really intense. But you still have that fresh fruit of the wines, because it's the beginning, it's the transition moment between the red fruit and the dry fruits like hazelnuts and nuts and almonds and so on. That's the 10-year-old Tawny is that beginning.
Yes.
And so you have a mixture, a ridge, a rim with already that little bit of yellowish oxidized color, but still some red intensity in here. And so it's a blend between 6 and 15 years old, so an average age of 10. Sure. The 20 is an average age of 20, the 30 an average age of 20, and so on. And it's very funny because, interesting, the concept of 10, 20, 30 and 40 was first idealized and put onto the market by my great-grandfather Luís Vasconcelos Porto that I mentioned at Quinta Vale in the 1920s.
Right.
So this idea of these special categories, which were not a special category then, but this idea of wine was first introduced into the market by Noval and by my great-grandfather. And so I always kept this incredible memory of how these wines evolved and what they were and the stories and why and so on. With the original.
The very old Tawnies are fantastic.
Yeah.
And almost on a par with the great vintages.
I totally agree. This is drinking good. I normally serve the Tawnies very chilled. I think they should be served really, really, really chilled to enhance all the dry fruit, which I wouldn't do in a LBV or a vintage port. They would serve them 14, 16 degrees Celsius, but these I would serve at 8, and white wine chilled. That would enhance the aromatics and the fruit, the dry fruit of the Tawnies. Yes. Be it a 10-year-old, be it an 1860 old Tawny from 1860. I would do this exactly the same temperature.
Yeah.
But these wines, Tawny ports, old Tawny ports have can cover a wide range of meals and moments, be it with the aperitifs of the dry fruits and cookies and figs that we have here, be it with cheese, be it with sweet desserts. Very chilled. I like them in summer with a fig, lettuce, rock salad. I like with some tomatoes too, but the tomato is very difficult for wine in general.
Yes.
But I like these bull's heart tomato, coração de boi, that we have in the Douro.
Yeah,
they
fantastic.
look like steaks. And ham and presunto, presunto and all that. That's wonderful. And if you have a good 10-year-old Tawny, very chilled in summer, this is just a great meal. Makes it a great meal too. So. Yeah.
Cristiano van Zeller, thank you so much for
James. It was a pleasure
sharing
having you here.
Your experience and best of luck for the
thank you very much.
The upcoming wine harvest.
Yes, thank you very much. Great to see you here. Thank you. Cheers.